Hi, Teri here from Stamping Magic. Welcome back to my channel. Today's project is a masculine card. I've used the handsomely suited stamp set together with the coordinating shirt and tie dies, as well as the coordinating well-suited designer series paper. So let's get started. These are all the measurements you need for all the elements required to create this project. So if you're interested in reproducing it, take a screenshot so you can refer to it later. Here is the handsomely suited stamp set, and today I'm using the happy birthday sentiment and this tie. I'm stamping with my Stamper Artist this time, and I'll be using normal weight basic white card. I'm going to position my first tie and pick it up with the plate, and then using real red ink I can stamp it down. Now I'm going to stamp 3 ties, you'll see why a little later on, so I'm going to repeat the process twice more. Then on another piece of basic white card I'm going to stamp the sentiment, again using real red ink. And this time I'm going to stamp it down and then overstamp it so I get a nice deep red colour. The sentiment will be punched out using the tailored tag punch. All the ties are going to be die cut using the coordinating die from the shirt and tie die set. Now I need 1 full tie for the shirt, and then I want 1 top piece and 2 bottom pieces. The bottom pieces I'm going to use for the handkerchief in the pocket, and the top piece I'm going to layer onto the full tie. Now you can use this die to cut out your top piece, but because you can't really see to place it, it's a bit tricky on the stamped image. I would only use this piece for that purpose if I was die cutting designer series paper. You can also use this die to create your handkerchief if you want to. I've now die cut my ties, so I'm going to keep 1 full one for the shirt, and then I'm just going to cut off the top piece from one of the others, and then I'm also going to cut off both of the bottom pieces. Here I have some of the well-suited designer series paper, and this will be my jacket. Now this piece measures the same as the front of your card base. Now what I've done is ensure that the pattern is centered on it. For this it's just thin pinstripes, so basically all I've done is make sure I've got an equal distance between the edge and the first and the last pinstripe. I'm going to use this die to cut out the V from the centre, and it makes it easier to line it up if you've centered your pattern, and it will look right, it will look like a suit when it's finished. Now you can either have one of the pinstripes running through the center, or you can have the sort of gap between the pinstripes running through the center. I've cut my piece so I've got the gap in the center. The cutting blade on this die does not go right to the edge on the top of the V, so you have to overhang the die slightly from the top edge of the paper. And this will ensure that your lapels will fit. If you put the die on the edge of the paper, your V will be too deep and your lapels will not fit. So I'm going to position the die with a little washi tape, then I can just flip this piece over and check that I can see the edge of the die on the back at the top. and then I can run it through my die cutting machine. And this is how it will look. Keep this V-shaped piece that you cut out because you can use that later. This is the die that you'll use to cut the lapels. Now when you cut them, you want your pattern paper going in the opposite direction. So my pinstripes are going to run horizontally. I've already cut mine out so you can see the effect that you'll get. You see the lapels will stand out, and this is much like a normal suit would be tailored. The pattern would go in a different direction. If I cut it with the stripes still vertical, then you would hardly see the lapels. They would just disappear into the jacket. Now going back to when I cut that V from the main piece, just to let you know that if you did cut it too deep, so if you put the edge of the die on the top of the paper, your lapel would be too short, okay? And you'd have to overcome this, you don't have to start again, you just have to trim a bit off the top shoulders of the jacket. If your lapels seem to be too long for the V, then it probably means that you position the die with too much overhang. So in this case, I think you should be able to just reposition the die and recut it. I'm now going to position the pocket die onto my jacket to see where it is in relation to the pattern. And it actually runs with 2 pinstripes right on the side edges. So I'm going to use that scrap piece that I cut out of the V, and I'm going to line my pocket up with the pattern, and I'll die cut it from there. Unfortunately, this piece is not quite wide enough so I can die cut the strip for the top of the pocket. So I'll need to use another piece of scrap for that. And I've got the piece that I cut my lapels from, so I can use that, and I'm lining the die up edge to edge with the pinstripes. So after the pocket pieces have been die cut, and I've layered the top strip onto the top of the pocket, if I position it, the pocket piece will flow with the pattern on the jacket, so the pattern is lined up exactly. I have a basic white mat here, and this is going to act as my shirt, and then I've got a separate piece for my collar, which I've used this die to create. Now both of these pieces have been embossed using the Tasteful Textile 3D embossing folder, and you can use more or less any embossing folder you have to create a pattern on these pieces. I've also gone ahead and added a mini dimensional onto each of the bottom points of the collar. Now the collar, the 2 sides of the collar are attached just by a tiny strip of cardstock in the centre, so it's quite probable that while you're making your card this will separate. It's not an issue, shirt collars usually separate anyway, so having the dimensionals on there already just shows me which is the bottom bit of the collar, because it's all angles and it can be a bit difficult to spot. I'm now going to join the shirt piece to the jacket piece. Now I've made my shirt piece quite large. It doesn't have to be this large, it only needs to cover that V, but this is what I used. Now if you've used a more directional pattern on your shirt, you will need to make sure that it's centered within that V, otherwise it's going to look very odd. Because mine's a random pattern, it's not an issue. Now my piece is slightly smaller than my jacket piece, so I'm going to try not to get glue on the pieces that won't be covered, if that makes sense. And I don't want to put glue down in that bottom section because I'm going to slide the tie in there. So I'm going to add the glue to the jacket piece so I can get right to the edge of that V. but I want to avoid the bottom part of that V so I can slide the tie in later. And I'm also avoiding the edges, and then I can position it over my shirt piece. Again, I don't have to worry about lining up anything other than the top edge because I've got a random embossed pattern. Now my collars managed to stay in one piece throughout, so I'm now going to position this at the top of the shirt. I'm not removing the backs to the dimensionals just yet. I'm just going to add a thin line of glue right onto the top edge of the collar, and then I can place it into position, centering it within the top of that V. Now I'm just going to leave this to dry for a minute before I continue. Now for the tie. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the backing from the dimensional that I've placed on that top section, and then place that on the top of the full tie. Then I can add glue to the back. Now I'm just going to put a line of glue down the centre. I'm not using a lot. I don't want this oozing out onto the shirt. And then I can very carefully, it's a bit fiddly still, but slide this down the centre of that V, and then position the top part of it underneath the raised part of the collar. And then I can just make sure that it's all nice and centred before I press it into position. To finish the collar, I can use tweezers to remove the backs from those dimensionals and then just press them into place. To secure the lapels into place, I'm just going to add glue onto the edge next to the V. Okay, so you don't want to put glue all over these. And then I'll position one side and then the other. So there's just glue on the edge of the V. To finish off the lapels, I want to raise the edges up slightly to give them a little dimension. So I've got some mini dimensionals here in black, and I'm adding 2 full ones under the points on the lapel, and then a half a one further down. And this looks much nicer than having the lapel flat to the card. Now for the pocket. I'm going to start by adding the little strip to the top of the full pocket, and then the 2 pieces of the bottom of the tie that I cut earlier, I'm going to combine these into one piece and add these behind the pocket so it looks like a handkerchief is just peeking out of the top. Then I can add glue to the back and position this onto my jacket, making sure that the pinstripes are all aligned. This next bit that I'm going to do is completely optional. The V at the top of the collar I'm going to cut away, and I'm going to make a neck to fit in there. Now we haven't got a lot of potential skin coloured cardstock colours, but I've chosen to use Petal Pink. Now if you want to do a darker skin colour, what you could do is use white cardstock but colour it using some of our Stampin' Blends markers. We have a few skin tones there that can be used. So I'm just adding glue to the back of my panel, and then I'll position the Petal Pink card along the top edge, like so. I'll then remove the backings to the dimensionals on my sentiment and position this at the bottom of my panel. Now, if I wasn't placing a sentiment here, I would add some buttons, perhaps some black buttons instead. My card base is in thick basic white, and this is half a standard sheet scored in the middle and folded to create a portrait card. So all I have to do now is add glue to the back of my panel and position it onto the front of my card base. And that's my card complete. I've kept the insides plain, but you could decorate these with some stamping or some designer series paper if you wanted to. And here's a look at my original card. Now, I left the neck on this one white so you can see the difference. I much prefer it with some colour there, but you know, it looks good either way. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this project. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you don't miss out on any future videos. Bye for now.